let us begin.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Japanese Roots, Canadian Soil, a special presentation hosted through the Center for Asian Canadian Theology and Ministry. My name is Dong-Ha Kim. I am the director of the center, and I'm very happy to be part of this special presentation in which Mr. Yusuke Tanaka is presenting. But first, this is a Knox College event, and I'd like to introduce Principal John Vissers.
Thank you, Dong-Ha. Thank you for this event that the Asian Center has organized. It is my privilege as principal of Knox College to welcome all of you to this event, to this presentation this afternoon, which Dong-Ha has already mentioned is sponsored by Knox College's Center for Asian Canadian Theology and Ministry. We're very pleased at Knox that for over 25 years, the Center for Asian Canadian Theology and Ministry and its council have really been at the forefront of addressing important issues related to the history and the place of Asian communities in Canada, the challenges that they face and the contributions that they make, especially in relation to the Christian churches and to faith communities. And so today we're particularly honored to welcome Yusuke Tanaka and welcome him to Knox College. He is a distinguished leader in the Japanese community in Canada. He's a journalist, a writer, a columnist, an editor, a teacher, and brings a great deal of insight into this whole history of the Japanese Canadian community. And so we look forward to his presentation. I also want to welcome all of you who are here, who have joined us for this event, and we look forward to a rich presentation and an opportunity for some questions and conversation to follow. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Principal Vissers. I also want to welcome and introduce Reverend Sujin Chung. He is the convener of the Center for Asian Canadian Theology and Ministry. So Reverend Chung.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Asian Center, I would like to welcome all of you this morning, especially Mr. Yusuke Tanaka. Thank you for your time. What an exciting event we are having today. Every person or every nation has its own unique history and stories to share. Today we will listen and learn from Mr. Tanaka's presentation about the Japanese immigrants and their struggles and contribution to Canadian society. Hope that we are all connected to the fundamental struggles of immigrants' history, and by listening to it, may we become closer to each other and discover our own story more vividly and clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Chung. And I just want to mention that Dr. David Bay, my assistant at the center, he and I will ensure that the meeting runs smoothly. And so welcome, Dr. Bay. Thank you. So without further ado, this event is entitled Japanese Roots and Canadian Soil. Mr. Tanaka, Yusuke, so please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, I'm Yusuke Tanaka. I came to Canada in 1986 at the age of 35, 5 years old, after having worked in the publishing, public relations and advertising industry in Tokyo for 10 years. I was totally tired of working just for money. I wanted to do something different, like volunteer work for the people who need help. And then I married a Canadian in Tokyo. So we decided to come to Canada to learn more about the world, foreign affairs. We meant to stay here only for 3 years originally. After having taken some ESL courses, I enrolled myself in gerontology, the aging studies at the U of T. Then I got a job of editing a community newspaper for the Japanese Canadians. A well-known author, Joy Kogawa, invited me to this job, saying that the majority of the readers were old people, mostly 60 years old or over, of Canadian-born and immigrant generations like me. It was 1989. Those were the dates when Japanese Canadians were uplifted after having redress agreement with the Canadian government. There was apology and compensation for the wartime injustices. My first work was to translate English letters to the editor into Japanese. I ran into a very moving letter from a senior lady who had grown up in the internment camp. She said she had been feeling ashamed of being a Japanese descent. And she had lived all her life with guilt because she thought Japanese Canadians had done something wrong. That's why they had thrown into the internment. But the readers approved that they had done nothing wrong. She wrote, quote, "I'm ready to stop living like an apology. I'm ready to forgive. I'm ready to give forth from the essence of my true nature, for my true nature is pure and I am innocent." I was more than just moved. I couldn't stop shedding tears as I translated this long letter. And when I finished translating it, I was ready to help them rebuild their life and ready to work for the human right awareness. And here I am, after 30 years of working as a community press. I encountered a moment that changed my life at the age of 40. I'm sure all of you will have that moment, or you had that moment sometime in your life too. I hope my talk of today will help you find your own moment of inspiration. And it refers to the first image, the title, History of Japanese Canadian Community. I will focus on the early days, 30 years of the early days, from 1890s to 1920s. Christian church and its role in the early days of the community and social justice. The logo was created by my friend and former Redress activists such as Jennifer Hashimoto and Sandy Usami to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the arrival of the first Japanese immigrant, Manzo Nagano, in 1877. And image two, please. Second image. Okay. 1880s, Yokohama port, then and now. Japanese immigration to Hawaii started in 1868. Today, the Yokohama harbor front area is called Minato Mirai, which means future port. Immigration from Japan to Hawaii started in 1868. Many Japanese migrant workers, driven by the dekasegi, go and make money spirit ethos, arrived in BC in the 1880s. They worked at such places like coal mines in Cumberland on Vancouver Island, followed by Vancouver and Stevenston to work at the sawmill salmon fishing and at canneries and logging camps. Some of them began to settle there to work throughout the year. But the conditions of living there were often unhealthy, unsanitary, and indecent. Today, the population of Japanese Canadian community is estimated to be around 100,000 or more. This figure represents 6 generations of Japanese Canadians, including so-called post-war immigrants like me. Number 3, please. In 1889, the first consul from Japan was posted to Vancouver. Fukashi Sugimura, on the right side, far right. And his family arrived there in Vancouver, accompanied by his wife's big sister, Gen Nagamine, on here, at the far left. Gen seems to have found her mission of life in Canada. She became the first female missionary for the Japanese Canadian community. As well, she became the first female business entrepreneur working as a tailor. Consul Sugimura reported to the headquarters in Japan that many Japanese women were working as prostitutes in Canada. Gen visited logging and sawmill camps in remote area to talk to those women who are working there as cooks and cleaners and prostitutes at night. Gen brought them back to Vancouver and taught them how to use a sewing machine so that they could make a living on their own. Number 4, please. Reverend Goro Kaburagi. He studied theology at the Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. In 1896, he was invited to the first Japanese Christian church in Vancouver. There he launched the first Japanese weekly newspaper, which was later renamed to the daily newspaper called the Canada Shimpo in 1903. He strongly appealed to the local Japanese community for the necessity of assimilation through learning English and converting themselves to a Christian faith. He believed that this will be the only way of avoiding racism. Meanwhile, he was strongly opposed to the establishment of national elementary school that adopted Japanese nationalistic curriculum that included worshiping emperor. At the outbreak of Russo-Japan War in 1904, next year, Reverend Kaburagi was suddenly thrown into the whirlpool of ultra-nationalistic wave that came from Japan. He found himself isolated among his own community. Number 5, please. Shinkichi Tamura. He was a successful businessman who founded the first Japanese church in Vancouver in 1896 and supported Reverend Kaburagi and Gen Nagamine. Actually, Tamura invited Reverend Kaburagi to Vancouver. And this is the Tamura's building, World Building, it's called. It was founded in 1914 in Vancouver, and is still there. He returned to Japan to be appointed as a member of parliament in 1917 for his contribution to Japan in terms of tax payment. Number 6. Vancouver Japanese Methodist Church members. Reverend Kawalagi and his congregation took initiative to build a second Japanese hospital in Stevenston, which was affiliated with Japanese Fishermen's Association in 1900. Before this hospital, the first Japanese church built in 1894 in Stevenston, that was built by a dentist and devout Christian, Umemura or Yamamura. The church, first church in Stevenston, have been used as the field hospital to accommodate TIFS patient, TYPHUS, TIFS, is correct? TIFS patients during the pandemic. That started in 1895 or so. Number 7, please. Tomekichi Honma. He came to Canada at the age of 18 in 1883 and studied English at the public school. In 1898, naturalized citizens of Asian background were deprived of their franchise vote. Honma sued Canadian government to seek a vote for the Japanese community in Canada. And that was supported by Reverend Kawalagi. He won this lawsuit at the Supreme Court of Canada, but he lost at the Privy Council in England. The Privy Council judged that the provincial government is eligible to deny the right to vote in a provincial election on his racial origin, regardless of being a British subject. In 1890, Tomekichi Honma's honor was restored for him by naming a school after him. So there is a Tomekichi Honma Public School in BC. That happened 90 years after this lawsuit. And this picture shows Kaiser Wilhelm II sent this picture to the leaders of Western countries with the caption, what? Peoples of Europe, guard your most sacred positions. What? If Japan keeps expanding their power over Asia, next they will target us, the Western countries. Racism in North America was agitated by Wilhelm II in this way. Number 8, please. 1907, Vancouver Riot by Anti-Asiatic League. Mobs led by white labor union workers and Christian ministers. In 1908, next year, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hayashi and Lemieux agreement restricted Japanese immigration to Canada. When the ships brought 2,800 Japanese from Hawaii to Vancouver in 10 months, racial tensions reached its peak. The mobs of 1,000 or more attacked Chinatown first, then moved on to Japantown, calling for a stand for white Canada. The damage to the Chinatown was far worse than that of Japantown. Later, Prime Minister Laurier compensated for the damages. On the other hand, Canada restricted the number of Japanese immigrants down to 400 annually. Number 9, please. An 18-year-old Senji Yamamoto, this young guy, he saw the riot in 1907 as a reporter of Canada Shimpo, the Reverend Kaburagi's newspaper. He was a member of Methodist Church in Kyoto. He lived in Vancouver from 1907 to 1911, 4 years, having studied at Britannia High School. Reverend Kaburagi was his inspiration. He led a Bible class for the youth at the Japanese church while working as a news reporter, schoolboy, fisherman, gardener, store clerk, etc., etc. According to Yamamoto's diary of 1907, the councils group and Christian church group were at odds, fighting each other on the issues that included building national elementary school, patriotism and emperor worshiping versus Christian church's assimilative attitude into Canada's society. The second issue was the Russo-Japan War, pro-Japan nationalism versus pacifism by Christians. The third issue was prostitution. The owners of hotel and restaurant, bars, brothel houses, they are all for the prostitution those days. Versus anti-prostitution, moral reformation by Christians. Some people appealed to Council Morikawa that Reverend Kaburagi should be exiled because he was a threat to the community. Senji Yamamoto later became an educator and a political activist in Japan. He became a member of parliament in 1928, but he was assassinated next year in March 1929 by a terrorist, ultra-right terrorist. In 1911, the guy on the right, high treason incident, 24 social activists were executed. The list included socialist, anarchist, and Christians, such as this guy, Seinosuke Oishi, Dr. Oishi. He had studied surgery at the Montreal University and worked at the Japanese hospital in Stevenston for a short period. Number 10, Yasushi Yamazaki. After the victory in the Russo-Japan War in 1905, Japanese government declared that Japan had moved out of Asia and has joined the Western powers. The Council of Japan in Vancouver recruited a local agent who could organize all the Japanese immigrant groups and their leaders together. The newly founded Buddhist church in 1905 needed a newsletter for their 6,000 members, while Christian churches had only a couple of hundred members. So they donated a printing machine to the Tairiku Nippo to have them compete with Reverend Kaburagi's Canada Shimpo. And there, Yasushi Yamazaki emerged and took over the Tairiku Nippo newspaper and became its publisher in 1908. He used to be one of the leaders of a Stevenston Fishermen's Association. he came to Vancouver. He moved to Vancouver and founded a Japanese association supported by the Japanese Council, business community, and the Buddhist church community. Like this, Yamazaki gained the power to control media and politics of the business community and the Buddhist church community. Between 1908 to 1919, a constant battle of smearing, face shaming, and personal attacks were repeatedly exchanged on the newspaper between the Tairiku Nippo and Kanada Shimpo by publishing offensive articles. As you can see from this cartoon, Reverend Kaburagi on the floor being crushed by the heavy bag full of guilt or sin. This continued until Reverend Kaburagi finally gave up on everything in 1919. He sold his newspaper and left Canada for Japan in 1923. Number 11. Number 11, please. Yes, this one. The Japanese Canadian soldiers of the First World War and the fight to win the vote. This volunteer soldier project clearly shows Canada's colonialism and racism of pre-war days. This article here, was published in a Japanese Canadian community newspaper, a newsletter called the Vancouver JCCA Bulletin, November 2011, 10 years ago. The article was written by a descendant of a Japanese veteran. He submitted a nomination to the government, recommending that they should acknowledge the contribution of Japanese Canadian soldiers. 4 years later, he received good news that the government has officially designated their contribution to be a national historic event. And a historian, as it's in this article says, and a historian wrote that the contribution by the Japanese volunteer soldiers was a milestone in the history of Canadian democracy, as it marked the first time that an immigrant community of Asian origin attained a franchise in British Columbia. I thought it's a bit strange article. This soldiers' dedication, their high casualty, actually only 1 in 4 came back in safe. It should be acknowledged for sure, but the thing is that the soldiers had been told beforehand from Yamazaki, their leader, that it would not bring the vote to the community. He apologized for his failure. So they knew it, and yet they were determined to go to war. Why? We need to see what exactly happened behind the scenes. After Yamazaki called for the cooperation and donation from the community to organize the volunteer soldiers, over 200 young men were recruited. Immediately, they had military training for 6 months. In the meantime, Yamazaki lobbied. He went to Ottawa and lobbied their politicians in Ottawa. Their first response sounded good, but over the time, it became not that positive. Yamazaki was asked to recruit 500 soldiers to form a company. But he knew that 500 was way beyond the possible number. Eventually, the government declined Yamazaki's offer. On the other hand, Reverend Kaburagi had been strongly opposed to this project from the first as a pacifist. And I think he knew that the government did not have a slight idea of granting the vote to any Japanese Canadian. Then a disturbing incident occurred. Those Japanese soldiers on training vandalized the Canada Shinpo's office, Kaburagi's newspaper. The soldiers were sued by Reverend Kaburagi. This scandal was even published in a mainstream newspaper, and that made the whole soldiers discredited. So the whole project turned out to be a total failure. But then something happened. Alberta found out to be desperately in need of more soldiers to fulfill the quota. So the once dismissed Japanese soldiers headed to Alberta to be enlisted. After the war, all the veterans were given their vote, but not for the Japanese soldiers. However, their courage and contribution were highly appreciated by the Canadian society after all. In 1931, 10 years later, the vote was granted to the Japanese veterans, but it was not further granted to any other Japanese Canadians until 1948 after the World War II. It was in 1948 when the vote was granted to the entire Japanese Canadian community, as well as to all the other ethnic communities. Again, the article wrote that the soldiers went to war seeking the vote. Is this true or not? I would say no. Then why did the soldiers go to war? A letter from a soldier to his home is telling us the reason. He wrote, quote, "We now go forward into battle for the sake of Canada and for Japan we love, and also for Great Britain. We shall joyfully give our lives for the love of freedom and justice." So, as you see, it has nothing to do with the franchise. Number 12, please. Okay, 1918, Spanish flu and establishment of first Japanese General Hospital. In 1918, local hospitals were inundated by the patients who were infected with the Spanish flu. The first fully licensed doctor and a devout Christian, Dr. Shimotakahara, and Councillor Ukita, together with Reverend Akagawa, petitioned the authority to use the gym of the gymnasium of the temporarily closed public school in order to quarantine the infected patients for 3 weeks. Japanese women volunteered to take care of the patients. In 1920, building upon this experience, the whole Japanese Canadian community worked together to establish their own general hospital in Japantown. Okay, number 13, please. Etsu Suzuki on the left was hired as the chief editor of the Tairiku Nippo in 1918. On July 1st, 1920, Etsu and his wife, Etsu and his union activists established the Japanese Workers' Union. The number of the memberships increased up to 1,000. 65 to 80 Japanese workers joined in the white workers' strike held in Swanson Bay in May 1920. The Japanese Workers' Union launched the daily Minshu, meaning people, daily people. Etsu Suzuki became the publisher, and his wife, Toshiko Tamura, here on the right. Toshiko led the youth and women division among the Japanese Workers' Union. Toshiko organized the workshops of the birth control for women. It could be said that there were at least 2 female leaders in the early days of Japanese Canadian community who tried to raise awareness of women's rights. Gen Nagamine, through Christian moral reformation, and Toshiko Tamura through labor union movement. The mission statement of the Japanese Workers' Union wrote, quote, "There is a lack of understanding between the white workers and the Japanese workers. Racial and language differences are the main sources of misunderstanding. Most of all, Japanese workers lack the recognition that we are the same human beings. We sincerely hope that we can see each other in good friendship as the same workers of the world." Eventually, they made an epochal progress. In 1927, Canadian Labor and Trade Council, TLC, accepted Japanese Labor Union to be their member. They were called Federal Union Number 31. We should make a note that no pre-war Japanese leaders had voiced that racism is wrong. Instead, they had admitted white racism was a norm in Canada and tried to avoid it or mitigate it. Japanese Canadians had to wait until 1980s redress movement to speak up that racism is wrong, and it deprived us of our human rights and dignity throughout their history. Now, looking back almost 150 years of history of an ethnic minority community called Japanese Canadian community, you will see that Christian community workers, ministers, and medical doctors and the teachers were the forerunners in terms of human rights issues, and they were inevitably pushed to the peripheral area to stand alone. Eventually, the Japanese Christian community stayed as a minority group compared with the Buddhist community. But like in the flu pandemic 100 years ago, the self-sacrificing spirit of Christians rose and made a tremendous difference in the community. We are now in the middle of depressive, apprehensive, bigoted coronavirus pandemic. But this must be an excellent opportunity to make a big change in community. Thank you very much. So,
thank you. Thank you, Yusuke, for first being willing to join us for this special presentation and sharing such insightful an account of a particular period of time in the early Japanese and Canadian community. Thank you. I think all of us present, we have learned much from this portion of not just the history of the Japanese Canadian community, but certainly the history of Canada in those days. And in hearing your presentation, there were so many areas that echoed the common paths that many of the immigrant Canadian communities have gone through, and in particular, the roles that the church, the Christians have played in various aspects of this society, not only being an important cultural center, but embarking on leadership of various areas of social justice, as you have mentioned, covered. I know that in presenting this or making preparations for this presentation, we are being confined to a specific time period, that you've had to cut out so many other aspects of it, and this is just a select perspective on it. And so perchance in the near future, there will be other areas in which you could graciously share some perspectives on it. So on that note, I want to thank you for your presentation for this day. Having said that, I am going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and open the floor to any other comments or questions that others may have. So please bear with me for a sec. Okay. There you go. So we have a wonderful. So if I may ask, if any present would like to have any comments or questions to Mr. Yusuke Tanaka, raise your hand or let me know. You can unmute yourself. And yes, we have a question from Sujin.
Thank you, Mr. Tanaka. It was really eye-opening kind of experience for me personally, and I hope that it will be the same with other people who are attending this event. I wanna know if you, because you're saying that the letter you wrote and translated from Japanese to English, right? That was the moment. That was a changing kind of your whole kind of life. Do you think if you have any like the letter you can share with us, or any place that I can go and read the letter, exactly the letter you are mentioning?
The letter was, I started working for the newspaper in 1989. And in the quite early days, that was September or so, I received, the English letters coming. This was English, of course, English letter, second generation Canadian. And so, yeah, I still have that letter. There are lots of other the letters that came in that they were inspired by the readers agreement. And then, yes, there's a lot of this kind of full of emotions and so on. Yes, they're recalling their bitter memories. Actually, the Joy Kugawa, sorry, she's not here. She, in her first novel, that was Obasan, she wrote she used the word storm voices. Storm voices. The voices are in the storms, and it won't come out. She's the person who opened up the voice in the storm. The Japanese Canadians never talked about, they don't talk about their experience, even to their children. So the children, they didn't know what had happened. So for the first time, the redress movement, redress agreement was quite eye-opening and surprising experience for the third generation as well, because they didn't know what happened to their parents. Parents didn't talk about it. Yes, those days they're full of letters.
So my question is, yeah, I was mistaken. Yeah, it was written in English, right? So that you had to translate English to Japanese community. I understand that. And if you can share with us, is that possible? The actual letters?
Yes, yes, of course. I have one. The one I introduced. Yes, I have the one. I scanned it, so I have that. But
Yeah,
it may take. Well, it may.
that's great. If you could send it to Tongha, then yeah, he will distribute. So we can. I want to sense the first sort of like that experience. I want to go through it, read it, and feel that their emotions and struggles. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Suji. Be sure to make that available to anyone who requests it once Yusuke shares that with me. Thank you.
I will send it to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments? Oh, there we go. There's I had a little note from Kim that it is available in a book, and we'll make that. Yes, Kim, please.
So that is a book that I just put into the chat. Letters written by Muriel Kitagawa, who was born in 1912, and yeah, so her letters have been published into a book.
Yes.
And she is quite a strong woman.
Very strong, very, very strong. She was the writer, right? Reporter.
Yes.
For the New Canadian. Yes. Yes, it's amazing that that was made into Terry Watanabe made it into I think theater play. Yes, I respect her.
Thank you for Kim for bringing that up. It's I think it just adds to the incredible enrichment of both the Canadian history and culture of certainly as introduced by Yusuke of the Japanese Canadian community. Any other questions or comments for Yusuke or any particular aspect of yes, Gordon, please. Just unmute yourself.
Yes, quite a profound presentation. And here I am, a 72-year-old white guy, pretty educated. I heard about this program from my United Church colleague, went in, and it's really only been in the last year that I've really got in touch with, that in fact, most of my adult life, I have been what I would call a white racist colluder. And I don't know if you've heard that term before, but it basically, is sort of describes someone like me who really most of my adult life, I would say that I've tried to be fair and not discriminate and to take people at face value and, extend respect. That being said, and I've been living in the States since 1991, so I'm most sensitive to my white racist collusion with regards to Blacks, but also, now I'm getting in touch with, with regards to, Asians and other ethnicities. I just watched the Chinese Exclusion Act on public broadcasting, which was very difficult to watch. And so I guess moving forward, it's people like you who are going to help me, you know, not only deepen my awareness of where I have not stepped up and really done my part, but also to, you know, to help inform me, you know, how to help bring others into a sense of awareness. So, you know, I just want to say that it's people like you that are going to be my mentors moving on, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. You know, I'm pretty sure that you can share your feeling with my ex-family, Paul's family, who was posted Canada's Anglican Church missionary, posted in Japan, 1916, and 5 children were born and raised in Japan as a minority, really minority in Japan, but still strangely, well, I don't know why, but they loved Japan. They didn't want to come back to Canada. And when the Reverend Percival Paulus came back, he was discriminated by the church members, church friends, other Anglican Church ministers, because he was suspected to be a spy from Japan. Okay, he refused to. When the government asked him to translate the Japanese map into English, he refused to do it because I'm a pacifist. I don't want to cooperate. And so, you know, their family, and again, my ex-wife was she grew up in Japan, so they have their own experience of being discriminated, racism. What is racism? You know, they experienced. And Ernie Best, okay, there's one family who was the Dr. Williams, Mark Williams. His church was in a Japanese church. He ran a Japanese church in Vancouver. When his members and Japanese Canadians were forced to move to internment camp, he decided to move with them and lived in the camp. You know, his granddaughter, Browning Best, is my friend. She still talked about that.
Wow.
And she grew up in Japan. So she told me that very impressive word. If you're born as a white in Japan, you die as a white in Japan. Not they can't be recognized as a Japanese in Japan. So that's racism. Okay, we have Japan has so very strong racism against other races.
Thank you, Yusuke and Gordon, for your gracious comments on this topic. It's, you know, in many ways, this is a very timely presentation, not just from historical perspective, but a lot of the common social issues that existed, you know, since when, and continues to be part of our society today. And so I think it's given us a very good glimpse in a conversation that we're having at this moment, only to the betterment of the issues that we all address together. So thank you all. I just want to highlight one thing that you know, as a center, constituted by various Asian Canadian immigrant churches. This is, I think, the first time that we've really had a formal conversation such as this with the Japanese Canadian community, at least one sector of the Japanese Canadian community. And it's in that sense, we are crossing an unusual culture within the Canadian society, that here we are, that each communities are very pertinent and components of the Canadian society as a whole. And forums such as this is really allowing us to, you know, cross cultures on multi levels for enriched conversation. So I'm just delighted by the insight that's coming out of our conversation, and I do hope that not just at Knox, but at various institutions, that this is providing a forum for which such conversations and future conversations can take place. And I think the better that we do that, and the more that we do that, this really opens up a strong intercultural component of our society, and certainly as an institution within the Toronto School of Theology. So I just want to say thank you, Yusuke.
Thank you.
For this event.
Well, thank you for your help to your help. You corrected my English and improved it. Thank you very much.
Always glad to learn. Okay. Thank you for each of your comments, and we pray that there will be much to take away from this meeting, and a lot more have joined us, of course, and few have left for various commitments. So I'm most appreciative, and I think on behalf of the Center for Asian Canadian Theology and Ministry, Knox College, we are most thankful for your presence at this time, your contributions, and your participation, of course. And that now that we've broken the ice, so to speak, on such an event, we hope to stay in touch and continue to build upon what was presented today. And I think it goes, yes, Myriad has said that, will there be a recording available? Yes, this is being recorded as we speak. So a recording will definitely be available. And if you like, we will also have a recording just of Yusuke's presentation for that portion also. So both will be made available. Thank you. And we will put that up on our website. So I know we have said it'll go till 11:45, but unless there are any questions or comments coming from our participants, I think we will end this a little early. Okay, great. Great, thank you. So, Yusuke, oh.
Someone raise her hand.
Oh, Kim, hi. Kim, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to take up time, but
not at all.
My comments to Mr. Tanaka is around the early role of women in the early immigration time. I came across a little museum in BC. I don't know where it was now, Cortland possibly, where there was a little display. It was just an accident, a little display that had a kind of a price list of women prostitutes in early times. 1800s, I think, and there was a price list for a white woman was so much and a Japanese woman was so much, and those stories are not well known of the women, particularly in these days when the shooting at Atlanta, where Asian women are seen as sex workers, prostitutes, and that link is so strong. So I've been trying to find more information about the women who came even before 1877 and ended up as prostitutes. Do you have some hints as to where you got some information?
In 1908, in Tairiku newspaper, they started a special report on the prostitutes, Japanese prostitute. In every station on the railway, along the railway, they had brothel houses. And there's some Japanese were working. A reporter from Tairiku Nippo, that newspaper, visited them and interviewed them and made it a long series of articles. And that was made into one book called Canada no Max, Canada's Brothel Houses in 1908 or 9. So there is a book. You can get it, this Japanese though. You can see it at the UBC special section. You can ask them. There is I'm not quite sure if they have an original, but in Japan, someone found the original copy. But the UBC must have the copy of that. Or Tairiku Nippo, they had a microfiche all the way. So if you can read Japanese, you can read them all. And there is a book written by Kudo, the last name was Kudo. She wrote a book about, she traced back, okay? Reading this book, she traced back one prostitute to Japan, to their descendant, okay? That was, her book was written in the 1970s. So 70 years before, that actually, we tried to translate that book, Kudo Miyoko, sorry, Miyoko Kudo's book. And someone got in touch with the publisher to get the right to translate. That was declined, rejected, refused. And she told me that someone, my friend, got in contact with them. That was a terrible experience. They didn't show any interest. So they even showed the anger at me. Why? She didn't know, okay? Now, the problem is the whole Japanese community, because of that book, was so ashamed and upset about that book and upset about the writer. So her name, Kudo Miyoko, was totally discredited by the Japanese community, and also there's a scholars society in Japan. They will never talk good about her. So this is a quite sensitive issue, actually. That's the answer.
Thank you.
And it's very, very sad. It's really sad. Okay.
Thank you for raising that, Kim, and responding graciously, Yusuke. Thank you. History being what it is, and arguably with some of the topics being very sensitive, I think.
Yes, and I'm known as a bad Asian writer because I touched on that sensitive part. and criticized Japanese community. And I wrote about the comfort woman issue and Nanjing massacre issue. None of them believe that it happened. They believe that it's fake. Chinese propaganda, Korean propaganda.
Well, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, thanks for sharing your passion for social justice, and certainly the presentation has covered the strong position that the church has taken on various social justice issues from the beginning, as the church today does in many aspects. So very appreciative of that, Yusuke. But this is just an eye-opening experience to have this conversation with you and of course the Japanese Canadian communities. So most appreciative on that front. And certainly under the current pandemic circumstances of various issues coming up, I think this is an excellent forum for us to address it together. It's not an isolated incident by any means, but certainly an issue that is widespread across many cultures, but always appreciative of hearing a perspective from a particular culture. So thank you, Yusuke. And any other questions or comments?
Can I make a comment on that issue?
Sure.
This is the reporter who wrote about the prostitute, a Japanese prostitute, Osada Shohei. And this is the guy. His life itself was quite very sad ending. He was in love with this well-known woman, female poet in Japan, but because of their parents, the family, he was not accepted by this the daughter's family. So they gave up on marrying, and he left Japan and came to Canada to work as a reporter. And when he visited the Brussels houses, seems like he found a very beautiful woman who was strict. She wanted to study English, and she wanted to study in Canada, in America actually. But she was brought to the sold to the ended up in a Brussels house. And seems like that the woman's photo seems like this. He's missing the lover, girlfriend in Japan. That's what the Kudo Miyoko wrote in her book. And he, of course, he died as a single person. He died young, quite young. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Yusuke. Thank you, Yusuke.
Never end. Okay.
Yeah. So again, on behalf of the center, I'd like to thank you for your presentation today, and many fascinating insights that's come out of the presentation, and for all of you and others who have joined us today for your presence, your participation, and your support for this special event. So thank you, and I think we could wrap up our session here. So respectful of the time, and yeah. So thank you. As I noted, that this recording will be made available, and I think for the most part there will be a separate recording of Yusuke's presentation in itself that'll be germinal to the whole event. So that'll be made available. So thank you once again to all of you, and we look forward to conversations more on this and other matters.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Sujin and David, can you just? Yeah. Hi, Wes, and nice to see you. Just hang on a sec, Sujin. Yeah. So I'll catch up with you, Yusuke.
Okay.
Okay. Take care. Thank you. Please say hi to Joy.
Yes, I will.
You can just press end at the bottom right, Yusuke. Hi, went in.
I'm clicking.
Yeah.
Clicking. It doesn't work.
Okay. Anyway. So anyway, Sujin, yeah. Okay. Okay. So Sujin, thank you once again. So I wasn't quite sure whether David was going to be present, but he was. So I'm most thankful. Anyway, we'll have to catch up, Sujin. Okay, so okay. Many thanks, Sujin.